Welcome back to the IDP Plus podcast. I'm your host, Johnny. You can find me on Twitter at JohnnyFreakinFantasy. On this episode, I am rolling out my top 24 linebackers for your upcoming 2025 IDP drafts. Before I get into it and share my top 24, I just wanted to mention this is a recap. I did drop a video preseason in June, before training camp, on my projected top 24 linebackers. This is kind of an updated rankings just to get you right before your drafts. So if you wanted to watch that video, I do go a little bit more in depth into each player. I'm just kind of recapping here and updating the rankings. You can watch at the end screen to the end of this video, and you will see that A1 top linebackers video pop up, and you can check out my first video. But right now, this is my updated rankings going into your drafts, your IDP redrafts. This is what I have for my top 24. So let's take a look at the top 12. I have the player's name back in June where I had them ranked. I call that before preseason, how old they are, how many games they played in 2024, how many tackles per game did they have based on an average, their 2024 solo assist splits, how many double-digit tackle games they had last year, how many tackles for loss, sacks, interceptions, forced fumbles, and pass defense, these splash plays we like to look at. So without further ado, let's look at my number one guy here, Zaire Franklin. Had him pegged as number one now and had him pegged there before. I believe everybody does at this point. Zaire Franklin, just a model of consistency. Only one player had more tackles per game on average. I will get into that player, my favorite player, coming up in a little bit, but 10.2 tackles per game. Zaire Franklin just does it year after year. The only crack in the foundation you can say about him is that he had off-season ankle surgery, but don't be fooled. If Zaire Franklin was hobbling a little bit, had ankle discomfort, which he eventually had surgery last year in 2024, he still led the league in tackles with 173. So get that boy right, get him clean, keep him in bubble wrap. He's healthy right now as it looks going into preseason. So we didn't see much preseason action out of Zaire Franklin, but no worries. He should be the bona fide number one linebacker regardless of scoring. So Zaire Franklin's going to stay here at number one. Moving into number two, which I had at number three. And the reason why I moved him back up to number two, and that's Zach Bond, is because we got some clarity on the linebacker room as a whole there in Philly. So next to Zach Bond, looks like it's going to be Jihad Campbell. He's finally healthy enough to assume that starting role until at least Nakobe Dean gets back. Maybe he holds on to it straight up. But why this is good for Zach Bond is I think that Jihad Campbell's more that Joker kind of player, not really a true off-ball linebacker next to Bond. I think that if they would have started, say, Jeremiah Trotter as the second linebacker there in Philly, maybe Zach Bond's tackle numbers would take a hit. But I don't think that's the case with Jihad Campbell. So Zach Bond up to the number two spot. As you can see, he still gets it done in tackles with 150 in that breakout year last year. Big splash play guy too, 3.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles. So we'll keep him in the top two. Moving on to number three, I have Roquan Smith. As you can see, I switched him and Bond. I had Roquan at two, but moved him down with that Jihad Campbell news. But that's okay. Roquan Smith, still a LB1, high-end LB1, no doubt about it. Good enough for third on my list. Still in the prime of his career at 28 years old. He's had 150 tackles in the last 4 seasons. Very bankable play. So Roquan Smith still a great find in a great offense. A lot of times we see great offenses, and that doesn't mean that IDP is going to be cream of the crop when it comes to linebackers. So Roquan kind of breaking the mold there. No way around it can he slip out of the top three. Moving on to number four, Foye Oluokun. I had him at number four, in June. I have him at number four still now. I know there was some panic last year about, what were they doing with his alignment? And that's a fair question. I mean, the defensive coordinator, thankfully we got a new defensive coordinator, Anthony, I think Campanile is there now. And, I'm sure a big reason why the other defensive coordinator got cut is because he was playing games with Foye and a couple other guys as well. I mean, I know Devin Lloyd, we're not talking about him, but he was messed with too. And they have another good young linebacker there. But Foye Oluokun to me is still the bona fide number one, no way around it. And still good enough to make top 5 on this list. Keep in mind, from 2021 to 2024, His lowest tackle mark was 173. So Foyer, don't look at 108 tackles last year and be fooled. Still buy into what he's putting out for us. Still 5 out of 13 games were double-digit tackle games, and he was also dealing with injury last year as well. So Foyer, I'm looking past the last year's bad taste in our mouth, and I'm really looking forward to this year, him returning to probably the top 3 as far as tackles in the league. So really excited about Foyer, and that's somebody who can be a value if other people are just looking at last year's stats. Moving on to number 5, I have Fred Warner. Nothing wrong with Fred Warner here. A little bit deprived in the tackle, outputs. He's not really, 150 or more tackle guy, but he has had 130 tackles plus hella splash plays in the last 4 years. So Fred Warner, maybe not somebody who is a top 5 linebacker and tackle heavy, but if you're looking at overall scoring, big 3 scoring, or big play scoring in general, Fred Warner definitely is still a top 5 linebacker. They lost Dre Greenlaw. He's now in Denver. They're playing games with D. Winters and Nick Martin. I think Nick Martin might have the higher ceiling next to Fred Warner when it comes to tackle heavy, but nonetheless, a kind of a downgrade there. I see, Dre Greenlaw is more of a tackle getter, and Fred Warner was still doing 130 tackles year after year with Greenlaw. So wheels up for Fred Warner with either of those two guys next to him. Moving on is Alex Singleton at number 6. This is one of my favorite guys. The only guy on this list who averaged more tackles per game than Zaire Franklin. And that's not surprising to me. This time last year, I was telling you that Alex Singleton, put your bets in, he was going to have the most tackles out of all players on defense in the NFL. Well, he was on pace for that, but he tore his ACL in week 3. So his season was cut short, but don't be fooled again. I know he's coming off an injury. I know they have Dre Greenlaw, but Alex Singleton, you'll see him in many people's rankings outside the top 10, even in the 20s. But for me, I just can't, look past the last 3-4 years he's had. He's just a straight banger. I don't know if there's anybody in the league. Maybe Zaire, you could say, but when it comes to just, throwing your body out and making the tackle, putting his body on the line every play, Alex Singleton, even though he's 31 years old, still makes my top 8. And here he is at number 6. So once again, tore his ACL, played 100% of games in that week 3, and still had 31 tackles and an interception in the first 3 weeks. So Alex Singleton can be a huge value here. If you're in a league with me, he's not sliding past top 8. So maybe in your league you can reflect that too if you're buying what I'm selling. And I had him before the preseason at number 5, so I actually moved him down a spot just to goes to show you, through this rehab process how high I've stayed on Alex Singleton. The only crack in the foundation for Singleton to me is if he would miss maybe the first week, he's not healthy enough. They want to protect him a little bit. Or the fact that Denver now did get Dre Greenlaw and there's, supposed to be a great team. This first 3 games last year when he had 31 tackles wasn't really when Bo Nix was going off and the team really, started to gel and find itself. So that's, 2 cracks in the foundation, I guess you could say, for Alex Singleton. But pound for pound, when he's on, the field playing 100% of snaps, which he should be again, there's not a guy who can garner more tackles than Alex Singleton, as far as game to game and year to year. So love Alex Singleton still. Big value to be had there, especially you'll see Yahoo Sleeper. He's, down in the late teens, early 20s in rankings. Buy all day there. Moving on to number 7, I have Dion Henley. I like to, get Jack Campbell and Diane Henley and make my team Jack and Diane. So maybe that's where you're coming from too. But Diane Henley, nonetheless, I had him before the season at number 8. I moved him up 1 spot to 7 here. 25 years old, 8.6 tackles per game last year. Not too much cracks in the foundation you can say about Henley. We all thought, he was going to be this player as a rookie. It just took him 1 extra year, turns out. And a big worry I had about Diane Henley was going into the preseason, was Junior Colson actually going to be who he was supposed to be this year? And as of right now, it doesn't look like Junior Colson, maybe they're hiding information to kind of throw their teams off. But Junior Henley, we haven't heard his name much in the preseason at all. So Diane Henley, big ups for him. I still cement him in my top 8. And, you should too. So I still love Henley a lot. Moving on to number 8. Caden Ellis here. We can't really, turn our heads on the way that Caden Ellis played last year. It was a tremendous year. He's in the prime of his career. Played all 17 games, 8.9 tackles per game, highest he's ever had as far as tackles with 151. Second highest when it comes to sacks with 5. Anytime you can get a linebacker to give you, 130 more tackles and 4 or 5 sacks. I mean, that's basically Fred Warner, and Fred Warner's 5 on this list. So to me, why Caden Ellis is not at 5, and he's here at 8, is definitely that I definitely think we have seen the top of the mountain here for Caden Ellis. Don't think it could get any better really for Ellis. And that, last year played 98% of snaps, which was his highest ever. 151 tackles, actually beats his next highest as far as tackles on a season by 24 tackles. So that's kind of an outlier year to me. When we look at 2023, he had 95% of tackles and 4 less tackles. So he moves up from 95 to 98% of snaps, but climbs a whole 24 tackles. Something's just not right there. And whether it be the sacks or the tackles, I think that, these numbers are, not going to get any better. They may plateau best case scenario, but I do anticipate a little bit of negative regression when it comes to the tackles. I still think Caden Ellis, type of player he is, he can get five or more sacks. So that definitely works in his favor if you're in big play scoring, but, expect the tackles to come down a little bit at least. Caden Ellis, like I said, I feel like I've seen the tip of the iceberg for him. It can't get any better. So kind of, you're paying the top dollar here for Caden Ellis at 8, but sure, he might be worth it again. Moving on to number 9, Jordan Brooks. I had him at number 10 before the season, back, up one spot here to the 9th spot. Still 27 years old. Feels like we've been watching Jordan Brooks ball out for, quite some time. Maybe it's something in that Seattle water. Maybe he's the next Bobby Wagner. Even when he had that torn ACL, came back with over 110 tackles. But last year specifically in Miami, 8.4 tackles per game, strong 143 on the year. In that, ACL year, he came back, and I think he had the most tackles he's ever had, most sacks he's ever had, with 4.5. Last year, he didn't have 4.5, but he had 3. So a small dip there, but Jordan Brooks, any way you spin it, 140 tackles with a couple splash plays, a couple sacks in there, definitely cements you in the top 10. So Jordan Brooks only cracking the foundation to me. I do think Miami's going to be a putrid team on offense and maybe on defense too, especially in the secondary. But Jordan Brooks is going to be on the field awfully a lot. The only bad thing I can say is they have a really capable tackling linebacker as the second guy there, as far as Tyrell Dodson. So, maybe he takes away a couple tackles from Jordan Brooks. But at the same time, I'm not worried about Jordan Brooks. He's been a stud. He's just 27 years old. Even in the torn ACL, coming back from that, he put up over 110 tackles. So full season here, as long as he stays healthy. I still love Jordan Brooks, one of the best, bankable linebackers you can get in IDP. Moving on to number 10, TJ Edwards. And I've seen TJ Edwards, range from anywhere from, I have him a little bit higher here. I had him at 13 going into the season. I dropped him back down to 10, talked myself out of it. I'm thinking, like, man, when you look at, TJ Edwards, another model of consistency. Last season, 129 tackles, which was actually, I want to say, his lowest in the last 2 years. The last 3 years. For the last 2 years, he's had 155 or more tackles. So I'm not really buying into this 129. I think I'm going to take the over here. I'm not worried about Tremaine Edmonds. I think Tremaine Edmonds is a fine LB3, but TJ Edwards is the guy we want here. And, I'm not really worried that he's going to switch roles. There's, Davis Allen, new defensive coordinator in here. To me, it's just kind of noise. It's just all, reasons to push TJ Edwards down. Sure, there's risk that, that the things will change, not for the better. But I'm just kind of erring on the side of, numbers here. The tape speaks for itself. TJ Edwards is a tremendous tackler, tremendous player in general. I love those Wisconsin linebackers. So, don't be fooled. TJ Edwards, you can talk yourself out of him, out of the top 15, but don't sit there and overthink it. Still think TJ Edwards is one of the best in the league. And this is a really, just while we're on this note, very deep year at linebacker. Stick around. I have some honorable mentions that I didn't have ranked in the top 24, but I could easily see getting there. So TJ Edwards, to me, again, top 10 linebacker. Don't overthink this one. Moving on to 11, Logan Wilson. I had him at 15 before the season, dropping him down to 11. Really bullish on Logan Wilson, somebody who I'm willing to overdraft. Say if he's at 15 or 16 in the rankings, and I'm at 10 or 11, I'll take Logan Wilson here. A big part of it, I know we have a bad taste in our mouth. Only played 11 games last season. I can't stop saying this stat enough this offseason. Logan Wilson, he played 11 games, right, in 2024. All 11 of those games, he had 8 or more tackles, which if we look at it on 17-game pace, he would have had 162 tackles. So you'd look at Logan Wilson a lot different if he didn't miss those 6 games. He was just balling. One crack in the foundation is, I guess you can call it that. They have a rookie, Demetrius Knight, who's supposed to do big things. I like Demetrius Knight as a LB3 kind of sleeper out there, but it looks like he's kind of, had some health issues. But nonetheless, I mean, even if Demetrius Knight's out there, they've had Jermaine Pratt, they've had Akeem Davis-Gaither there, same time as Logan Wilson. And Logan Wilson just put up, numbers continuously. So, again, really good offense there in Cincinnati. But when it comes to defense, I think they're, maybe they're not as good as we think, and they're going to get the ball run down their throat. Still think the offense is elite, but Logan Wilson, regardless, is the leader of that defense. And, maybe Demetrius Knight takes away some tackles, but Jermaine Pratt last year, to me, was more of a threat. And while Jermaine Pratt was there with Logan Wilson, he still, like I said, had 8 or more tackles in every game. So I'm more than fine with bumping up Logan Wilson in my rankings. I know other people are a little bit, down on him, but that's why I'm high on him. Number 12, moving on to Jamie and Sherwood. I kind of get like Zaire Franklin, little poor man Zaire Franklin vibes with Jamie and Sherwood. Undrafted free agent, a little bit younger, 25 years old, but kind of the same lineage is Zaire Franklin, an undrafted rookie, not rookie, but undrafted player, come in, get their opportunity a couple years later, and absolutely shine when they do. Jamie and Sherwood, absolute baller. He got signed to a 3-year, $45 million deal, and when we look at Jamie and Sherwood, one stat here I want to push out is that 98 of his 158 tackles were solos. So let's just look at that top 12 while I'm looking here. Nobody in this top 12, Zaire Franklin included, had more than Jamie and Sherwood when it comes to solo tackles. So, check your scoring there. If you're getting, two or more points for a solo tackle, bump Jamie and Sherwood up in your rankings. I do think that this was real. I don't think it was an outlier. I am a little bit worried that Quincy Williams had a down year, and maybe he can eat a little bit more now that kind of like the CJ Mosley effect is out of there. We know we're moving on from Mosley. Quincy Williams maybe rebounds and takes some tackles away, but still, Jamie and Sherwood, don't overthink it. Don't think this was an outlier year. They've invested in him, and I think that the Jets are going to be on the field awfully a lot this year. So Jamie and Sherwood should have plenty of opportunities to rack up tackles again at this crazy rate. Maybe even hits 100 solos this year. Who knows? Before I move into 13 through 24, I just wanted to mention Bob Lung's Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. So get a leg up on your opponents with Bob's 10th annual edition of the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide for 2025 before time runs out. Purchase yours for just $15 on Amazon. Just search 2025 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, and you can find Bob Lung's guide on Amazon. So Bob Lung, of course, we all know him, GOAT. I was at the Expo. This is my second year meeting Bob Lung. Great guy and great work on his consistency guide. So give that a look on Amazon. Let's move into 13 through 24 on my list. Now we get looking at the second tier, kind of like the LB2s. I had Edgerrin Cooper. He's my first guy at 13. I had him higher, but I kind of talked myself out of it. And that's not to say, things are on the descend for Edgerrin Cooper. I don't think that's the case at all. But, just like I said, deep year for linebackers. You're looking at this 13 through 24. A lot of these guys could be in the top 12, and Edgerrin Cooper is no different. To me, I just kind of want to see it. We had, a good taste left in our mouth with Edgerrin Cooper last year. And when I put this stat into his perspective, it really makes him, want to sound like a top 8 linebacker. So Edgerrin Cooper, 87 tackles on just 55% of snaps. So basically, if we doubled that, I know that's 110% snaps, but you're looking at, over 160 tackles. Is that real? Is that fake? The jury's still out. We don't know, but we do know that, Edgerrin Cooper ended on the year on a really strong note. Last 4 games he had played, 35 tackles, an interception, and a sack. So almost 10 tackles a game in those last 4 And I think that's pretty telling. When you look at these rookies, I'll talk about another one, Tyrese Knight, later. You look at kind of like what they did towards the end of the season. To me, I think that's more accurate than kind of looking at the year as a whole, because these guys weren't playing those snaps. Edgerrin Cooper wasn't playing. He was, playing under 50% of snaps the first couple games. So last couple games is really what you want to gauge it on, and that really leaves us with a good taste in our mouth. The only thing is, I just don't know that Edgerrin Cooper is going to be that middle linebacker. The guy who can go out and get the sacks that we expect him to. 3.5 sacks on just 55% of snaps is outrageous. So we're probably thinking he's going to have 6 or 7 sacks and get 130 tackles. I mean, that might come to fruition, and that's what I'm kind of banking on it here to have him at 13. But at the same time, they still have Quay Walker there. Quay Walker, we know he's in the doghouse as far as IDP, but he's still a good player, and he can still rebound. He's still young. So to me, the first crack in the foundation is, what is Quay Walker going to be to that defense? They also have Isaiah McDuffie, who's been a proven capable vet, familiar with the Green Bay defense. And I know Edgerrin Cooper has that big, prowess, that high draft pick investment in him. But at the same time, Edgerrin Cooper, who's to say that it all just lines up that way, that he's going to play the middle spot? He is, but who's going to say that he gets those sacks from the middle? Like, he's just maybe on a different alignment now, a different kind of role. He's leading the defense. He's calling the plays. So maybe that kind of messes up the sacks. I mean, I think the tackles will be there, but I wouldn't, peg this guy to get 7 or 8 sacks. I think, if you can go in and get 130 tackles and 5 or 6 sacks, that's fair, but either way, if that's the output, Edgerrin Cooper is going to be a hot commodity. I already see him moving up in the rankings in these, best ball drafts I've done over the summer. So Edgerrin Cooper, maybe if you're in a league that is a little bit, more shallow or with casual fans, you can kind of get him for a discounted price. Probably somewhere between, 12 and 15, 12 and 16 is probably where he's ranked. And I wouldn't mind if you kind of made the jump and took him around 10 or 12 even. So Edgerrin Cooper, hella potential. Is he going to put it together this year? And can you take him over some other guys on this list? Like the next guy I'm going to talk about, rookie. Here we go, unproven, right? I just talked to myself about bankability and how important that is, but Carson Schlesinger, I think, is the absolute real deal. I had him, the most polarizing guy on this list, had him ranked at 25. I have moved all the way down to 14. We can sit here and talk college stats. He had over 11 tackles per game. That's wonderful in college. And that was kind of his big year last year with UCLA. Didn't really show up, pop outside of, the year he had last year in college. So a little bit of a late bloomer, but you know what? I've kind of just deep dove into YouTube and Twitter and Google on Carson Schlesinger. And I'm going to shout out a guy named Matty Dubs. Matty Dubs on YouTube. If you ever see a video of him breaking down film, watch it, because that guy's really good with it. And he had a really good breakdown of Carson Schlesinger. Really took into account every little snap and kind of paused the preseason snaps that Carson Schlesinger was putting together, and really made it enticing for why you should draft Carson Schlesinger. I mean, this guy was getting held up by blockers, shedding them. Watching the running back with the ball, shedding the blocker, and then continuing to make the tackle. So basically, for a rookie, he's just throwing around offensive linemen and still making the tackle. You can't get in his way. He's playing on a horrible Cleveland team. I hate to say it, but horrible Cleveland team. And I think this defense is going to be out there a lot. Jordan Hicks retires. The stars just keep aligning for Schlesinger. Not only, is there just limited bodies there, and he's the top dog, but at the same time, he's a banger for these guys. He's shown it on tape. He's showed that, what he had last year in college was not a fluke. And I think Carson Schlesinger is definitely a guy who I have here at 14. I could even see him becoming a top 8 linebacker by the end of the year. So I could sit here and talk about him next year in the top, 5, top 6. It would not surprise me at all. So Carson Schlesinger, I know bankability is important. You want to see these guys' track record, but I'm going to go ahead and say, go ahead, take the jump here on Schlesinger. Moving into 15, Blake Cashman is a guy who I just keep moving up and up in my rankings. I had him at 19 in the preseason, moved him here to 15 overall. And Blake Cashman, man, I mean, when we look at his last 2 seasons, he's kind of started slow. Liked him in college coming out of Minnesota, just kind of really Took him a while to get going. In New York, he had a big season before he left, and then went to Houston, had a big season 2 years ago. And that's kind of like, what we remember Blake Cashman from 2023 to now. And things have been really well. But keep in mind, Blake Cashman has missed 6 games over the last 3 years, 3 in 2024, and then 3 games missed in 2023. So there is some cracks in the foundation to him. But overall, when we look at Blake Cashman as a whole, 112 tackles last year on only 14 games played. He had a nice average of 8 tackles per game. So let's just say he plays those 3 games. He's having 136 tackles. Very juicy there. Nothing wrong with that at all. Splash plays are there. 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Blake Cashman, one thing that works out in his favor is that Minnesota uses the second linebacker the least in the NFL, which is a bad omen for Ivan Pace, but a good omen for Blake Cashman. So Blake Cashman is a great, LB2 if you can get him at this value. I do think that you're going to have to jump. If he's in the rankings in the 20s, you're not going to get him in the 20s. There's going to be somebody in there that sees the potential, that sees the tackle, proponent that Blake Cashman can, put up. And I think that's fair. And you should be that guy taking a little reach. I think 15 here is pretty modest. I think he can go even top 12 linebacker, you can say. But still, there's plenty other guys here. You don't need to be overreaching too crazy. But I think 15 is a very happy medium for Blake Cashman. 57 tackles, 1.5 sacks. This is in his last 6 games of 2024. So we said, what can you do for me recently? Blake Cashman was on a heater, especially coming down the last third of the year. Those last 6 games in 2024, 57 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, and 3 pass defense. So not only can get it done with the tackles, but also a big-time splash player as well. And keep in mind, if Blake Cashman ever goes out, Ivan Pace, I would immediately put Ivan Pace at 15. If whoever's that linebacker that's starting in the middle for Minnesota is, to me, a top 15 linebacker. So Ivan Pace, if Blake Cashman does get hurt, immediate pickup, immediate start. He can get 10 or more tackles, he's shown, when he's starting as well. So like both of these guys, not at the same time, but whoever is the healthy guy is a top 15 linebacker. Moving on to 16, and that's Bobby Wagner. Now, Bobby Wagner, nobody beats Father Time. He is 34 years old. Last year was the lowest tackle output and sack output he's had in the last 3 years, with only 132 tackles, 132 tackles and 2 sacks. Now, Bobby Wagner, again, to kind of push hit a guy when he's down. Only 3 double-digit tackle games last year, very inconsistent at times. But still, let's call a spade a spade. 130 or more tackles and 2 sacks is still a phenomenal linebacker year in IDP. Still a lot of use, a lot of value to be had there. So Bobby Wagner, there's guys on this list. Carson Schlesinger, we don't know who he is. Blake Cashman could get hurt. So I understand the upside on these other guys is higher, but at the same time, the bankability that Bobby Wagner gives you, we know Frankie Louvu's not a factor there, taking away tackles from Wagner. And you know what? I think that even though he's 34 years old, he can go actually put up more than 130. So I'm not saying he's going to have 150 and 5 sacks. That's the pipe dream. But again, if he can kind of put up the same numbers last year, he's going to provide you value at this 16 spot. Moving on to 17, I have Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell's another polarizing guy. Either you hate him or you love him. I don't exactly love him, so I have him here at 17, but I don't hate him at the same time. 24 years old. This is going to be his 3rd year. It feels like we've been here many years now with Jack Campbell, like, oh, he's this first-round linebacker. He's going to put up these elite LB1 numbers, and it just hasn't happened yet, straight up. Only 7.7 tackles per game. Did play a full season last year. 131 tackles is something to write home about. Sack and a half. He's not a huge splash player, but he can get at the quarterback. But Jack Campbell, he did play 100% of snaps the last 7 games of 2024. Alex Anzalone being hurt kind of sparred that. And only in those 7 games, he had decent 50 tackles. So again, 100% of snaps. We were waiting for it the whole year. It finally happened those last 7 games. But he only had 50 tackles. That's not really anything to write home about with a guy we put this much attention on, this much respect on. That's only an average of 7.1 tackles. That's pretty much, horrible. If you look at these other guys, I mean, Blake Cashman, 8 tackles a game last year. Bobby Wagner, 7.8. Spillane, 9.3. Terrell Bernard, 8. So to say 7.1 to me doesn't really ring bells. Is very impressive. Again, he's a first rounder. He could put it all together. I'm assuming this 100% snaps is going to stay, so that's working out in his favor. I'm not really a big Alex Anzalone guy. I still expect him to be rosterable, still probably an RB or LB3, LB4 range. Don't think that's a guy that I'm really, motivated or excited to draft. But Jack Campbell, I do think that, the numbers do come up a little bit. Just be temper expectations. I don't think this is an example where, Jack Campbell's going to play 100% of snaps and get, 8 or 9 tackles a game. I just don't see that. Lions have a tremendous team. They're going to be on the attack a lot. They're going to sustain drives, which is going to keep Jack Campbell off the field. And if we think they're so good, Detroit, that means other teams are probably going to have to throw the ball majority of times, especially in the second half against Detroit. So that's kind of working against Jack Campbell as well. Still love him to put him on this list in the top 24. Again, it's a loaded year at linebacker. So to make this list says a lot, and has a lot of trust in your hands when it comes to my rankings. So Jack Campbell, don't love him, but at the same time, he's going to be solid for us. Moving on to 18, have Jack Campbell higher than Robert Spillane. Robert Spillane, another polarizing guy. You either hate him or you don't. You either have him at top 8 or you have him here at 18. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm really not a big fan of Robert Spillane this year. The biggest issue to me is we're not in Kansas anymore. He's not in Vegas anymore. 158 tackles in 2024 for Vegas. And I think that was 2 sacks and 2 interceptions as well. And then 2023, he had 148 tackles. And I want to say 3 sacks and, 2 or 3 interceptions in that year as well. So bottom line, the last 2 years, Robert Spillane has been a top 8, top 5 IDP linebacker. I just don't think, and it's a bold call, I could be proven wrong, but I just don't think it's going to happen, at least not in this degree, in New England. New England, first and foremost, when's the last time they had a stud linebacker? You're probably looking at Jawan Bentley back in 2023, but he only had 125 tackles, did have 3 sacks as well. But further than that, you have to look back to Gerard Mayo 2010 when he had 174 tackles. To me, it's just a bad omen. I'm trying to, take a New England linebacker here. I get it. It's Robert Spillane, still 29 years old, still in the prime. Maybe could turn things around. Maybe could post 130, 140 tackles. But 18 is actually pretty low. He's probably in the rankings as a top 15, top 12 linebacker. And at that point, I'm just straight up out. I'm not paying that price tag. I still think he could be a fine linebacker. And I still think there's a world where, we have new coaches here. Vrabel's in New England. Gerard Mayo's not there. Gerard Mayo was not playing any linebackers close to even 100% of snaps. No linebackers came close to 150 tackles when Mayo was there. We'll see about Vrabel, but I'll be proven. I'll be on the outside until I'm proven wrong on this one. So Robert Spillane, still think there's hella potential there. If he was a top 14, top 12 linebacker, would I be surprised? Yeah, I actually would, and I don't see it happening. So to me, 18 is pretty generous for Spillane. He's 158 tackles, 148 tackles. That's, tough to drop you down lower than that. But I think this is the lowest I'll go with Spillane. Still, should be the guy in the middle communicating. All reports have been great about Spillane. He's a, coach on the defense there, and, things are looking great. So maybe Mike Vrabel, I know he, signed him, gave him a look when Robert Spillane's career started. So maybe it all hits home and it's a story that's, supposed to be written. But Robert Spillane, again, I'm just out on him this year. At this price tag, at least. Moving on to number 19, I have Lavonte David, 35 years old, the oldest linebacker on this list. And actually the linebacker who had the most sacks last year with 5.5. So Lavonte David overall, still love him. Of course, father time, nobody beats him. 35 years old, that day's going to come eventually. Hopefully, I don't think it's this year, though. Lavonte David, not only, is he has that proven 13 years track record, they also really don't have any bangers next to him. I do like Servassier Dennis as a sleeper, but I also like KJ Britt coming in the year last year, and he didn't do Britt for me. So Who's to say Dennis will? Dennis has had a tough time staying healthy himself. So Lavonte David all day is the linebacker to own here in Tampa. And I still think a very great value here inside the top 20. Don't overthink it. Lavonte David is model of consistency. If you're looking for 140 tackles and 5 sacks, good luck. There's not many players, especially when you get this low, that can do it. But, Lavonte's probably going to put up 120, maybe a little bit more, with a couple sacks, 3 or 4 sacks, a couple other splash plays in there. This might be, the last year or two. Hopefully, we got 2 or 3 more. But, it's coming. So Lavonte David, I miss those days. London Fletcher, Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, those guys as older guys, Lance Briggs on my fantasy teams. I still dream about that. So draft Lavonte David this year so you can dream about it one more year. Moving on to number 20, Terrell Bernard. Terrell Bernard is another polarizing player here. On one hand, he started off when he got his opportunity, I believe, in year 2 for Buffalo, 6.5 sacks, and the tackles were there. I believe it was over 140. That's what we were expecting last year, but we got let down. Not only, did the average, fall down to 8, which is still sturdy, more than fine. That's a great average, 8 tackles a game. But he also did deal with some injuries, and that's kind of, Terrell Bernard, what we kind of know him now as being kind of that off-injured player, right? And maybe he has a chance to change that around this year. I know people that are very high on him, rightfully so. When you look at the, sophomore year, he had that career year. And you look at some of the numbers last year. Terrell Bernard, I want to say the last 4 games, he had 38 tackles, so that's almost 10 a game. He did have 4 out of 13 double-digit tackle games. That's not very impressive. That's just under a third. But at the same time, Terrell Bernard, we cut him a lot of slack. He was coming back from a big injury there. Didn't really play 100% of snaps. They were messing around with Dorian Williams. Matt Milano came back. But let's pump the brakes here, folks. I do think that Terrell Bernard is absolutely the linebacker to own. I'm not really worried about any other linebackers there. I think that Terrell Bernard's going to be the guy in the middle. He's going to be that 100% player for the Bills. I'm not worried about Milano, not worried about Dorian Williams. I think for those guys to play a factor, Terrell Bernard himself would have to get hurt. Like I said, I've seen Terrell Bernard go in the top 12, top 15. I'm just not so high on him. Again, Buffalo, great team. They're probably going to hold the ball often. Josh Allen and company is going to sustain drives. And that means that the defense isn't going to really be on the field all that much. And when they do, they're probably going to be thrown against because teams are probably coming back against them, not, being up on them. So that, to me, plays a huge factor in why I have Terrell Bernard down at 20. Oh boy, Wisconsin linebackers. I love 21. This is one of my favorite sleepers. I don't think you're going to find any rankings where Jack Sanborn, unless you're really like in an IDP heads, tournament, you're not going to find Jack Sanborn in the top 25 rankings. You might find him in the top 40, but yeah, nobody's is going to have him pegged as a top 25 in their projections. But experts out there will, and I'm not calling myself an expert. I'm just calling myself a big Jack Sanborn fan. Wisconsin linebacker, love him. Love Chris Borland. Thought Ryan Connolly was going to be great, but let's talk a little bit more about Sanborn. Jack Sanborn, what you need to know, and this is what we know. How many third string linebackers are IDP, mainstays or, guys that are known, Jack Sanborn was the third linebacker in Chicago, but when he got on the field, we all wanted to pick him up. He was a household name for us. We all knew who he was. Most impressive stat. So he played 3 years for Chicago, right? He's still young. He's still 24 years old. When Jack Sanborn played 85% or more snaps in games, which happened 7 times, 7 games, he had combined 71 tackles, over 10 tackles per game, right? He gets a 1-year deal similar to Zach Bond. Gets signed to the Dallas Cowboys. Matt Eberflus, who was his coach back in Chicago, now goes to Dallas. All signs are looking like Jack Sanborn's going to wear the green dot this year. He has been in training camp. To me, I had him at 22. Before the season, I moved him up 1 spot to 21. I didn't care. He didn't have to be the middle linebacker. If him and Kenneth Murray were on the field and Jack Sanborn was the linebacker 2 playing the will spot, playing 85% of snaps. That's all I need because he's going to get me 10 tackles a game. Now, I understand in 17 games, is he going to have 170 tackles? Probably not. But, if he can go out and average 8.5 tackles, he's going to be more than worth it here and a big-time sleeper. I don't think he's going to get drafted inside the top 30 linebackers unless somebody's really a big fan like myself. But Jack Sanborn, don't be afraid to reach for him because I think that he's the linebacker to own. If we look last year, Dallas, we expect them to be a bad team again, especially when we're looking at the Michael Parsons holdout. We don't know what that entails yet. We know they have some problems on offense. Can Dak stay healthy? Can Dak put together? Can they run the ball? All kinds of questions here in Dallas, but nonetheless, last year was a very fruitful spot for IDP. Eric Kendricks, 138 tackles and 3 sacks. I think that Jack Sanborn, if we can get that production, if Jack Sanborn has 138 tackles and 3 sacks, we're happy here. But ladies and gentlemen, I think there's a room where there's more upside to Jack Sanborn than a 31-year-old Eric Kendricks. So Jack Sanborn, I'd like to see him, if he's playing close to 100%, easily blow past 140 tackles and some splash plays. We've seen him get out the quarterback too. So wheels up for Jack Sanborn. I'm one of his biggest proponents, biggest fans. In every podcast I've been on so far this offseason, I've tried to say his name. So one more time for his farewell tour before we get into the season, draft Jack Sanborn. I don't care if you're in a shallow, you only start 2 linebackers. You want him to be your linebacker too. Moving on to 22. I had Ernest Jones at 11. Move him back down all the way to 22. He did have a tremendous 136 tackles in 16 games played. His first 5 games for Seattle, and keep in mind, Ernest Jones was through the ringer last year. He started off in Tennessee, then he went to Seattle. Year before that was playing for the Rams. He's been through the ringer last year, but first 5 games goes to Seattle, 55 tackles, 11 tackles per game. We're looking like, nothing's changed. Ernest Jones can ball out, wherever he's at. But when you look at the last 5 games, when a guy named Tyrese Knight, the second linebacker in Seattle, kind of really started playing a prominent role, Ernest Jones, in those last 5 games, he didn't have 55 tackles. He had 39. Big dip there. So a kind of bad omen here, as Tyrese Knight gets going. Ernest Jones kind of lost his tackle prowess. And still 39 tackles in those 5 games. If he would have done that all year, that's an average of 7.8 tackles, which is still fine. It still keeps him on this list, but certainly not in the top 10, top 12 we saw him before. If he would have had that 7.8 tackles per game, he's looking at 133 tackles on the season, and he had 3 more than that. So that's about what his numbers are. 136 tackles, maybe a sack or 2 in there, maybe a pick or 2 in there, but Ernest Jones, I don't think that he has the ceiling or the floor that we thought he did, especially in those Rams days, which is why I like one of the other Rams linebackers coming up. But before I get to him, I just wanted to mention my 23rd guy, Azeez Al-Shaair, who I think is getting a little bit slept on. We have this perception that he's a dirty player. He couldn't stay on the field. He couldn't stay healthy, which is true. He had some injuries. He had some suspensions. Bottom line, it was just a horrible year. And, if you look at any other year, really, that he's been a starter, that wasn't 2024, you'd see good things. You'd see the good side of Azeez Al-Shaair, and I'm seeing the good side too. I had him at 21 before the preseason. I have him down to 23, and that's not to say any knock on Azeez. It's just kind of like the Swessingers, the Cashmans, kind of, Sanborns kind of overtook him. But Azeez Al-Shaair, I still like him a lot. Still a lot of value to be had here. When we look at his totals last year, we see 11 games played and 70 tackles. That was only an average of 6.4. That's not going to cut it for a top 24 linebacker. But let me tell you something. In 3 out of the 11 games last year, you're looking at 3 games where Azeez Al-Shaair played less than 50%. I believe he was hurt twice, and one of those was when he got ejected. So we're looking at these numbers, and we're not taking a grain of salt. But here's the grain of salt. Again, 3 of those 11 games, he played less than 50% of snaps. So cut the man some slack here. 5 out of those 8 games. So let's just take those 3 games and not look at them where he played less than 50% of snaps. The other 8 games, 5 of them, he had 8 or more tackles. I'm cool. I'm cool with Azeez Al-Shaair. I'm not drinking the EJ Speed Kool-Aid anymore. Still like Henry 2020, and that's going to maybe take away some of Aziz's, upside. Don't think we're in the world where he's, a bona fide top 15 linebacker anymore. But I can't live in a world where Azeez Al-Shaair going into 2025 is outside the top 24. He's still the best linebacker there. We don't know. The jury's still out on Houston. Sophomore slump by C.J. Stroud last year. By the team in general, they're dealing with injuries. Now Joe Mixon looks like to start off on IR. So Houston maybe not as good as they had been the last couple of years, and that actually helps Azeez Al-Shaair. Let's keep that defense on the field. He's a full-time player. We know that. As long as he's healthy, and I think as of right now he is, I do expect him to be the number one linebacker, the man in the middle. He's the leader of that defense. So there's huge value here. I think Azeez Al-Shaair, I don't think you're going to see him as a top 18 linebacker anymore, probably top 25, top 30. And at that point, Azeez has some good value. And I think that he's definitely a player who you can get and reap the benefits here. I think, he's still a top 24. Obviously, in my rankings, top 24 linebacker. But to me, it doesn't matter really the scoring either. This is a guy who can garner sacks, interceptions, pass defense, tackles for loss. So Azeez Al-Shaair, really comfortable with him as my linebacker too going into 2025. Last but not least, and stick around, I do have some honorable mentions, guys who could make this list. And this guy was on that list, but he moved up. There's somebody else that came out. I'll talk about that player in a minute, but Nate Landman is the guy. Him and Jack Sanborn are like my two guys that I'm trying to, pull over everybody as sleepers and go ahead, draft the, big names, Fred Warner's with your 5th pick. I'm going to, try to get Jack Sanborn and Nate Landman with my 10th, 11th pick. I might have to reach another round or two. I don't want to lose them because after this is kind of gets a little bit bleak. But Nate Landman, if you can get him at 24 overall, I think it's a huge slam dunk. Flying under the radar right now, still is. Even though we've heard big news that he's wearing the green dot in for the Rams for LA. Obviously this is preseason. It could mean nothing. They could come out and Omar Spates and Troy Reeder out there, and Nate Landman's an afterthought. I just don't think that's the case. I'm buying into this, Kool-Aid. We've seen him wear the green dot in training camp. Nate Landman is a guy who I talked about already in my off-season videos is, hey, watch out for this guy because if he gets an opportunity, he could be an absolute stud. And just like Jack Sanborn, guys that were kind of reserve role players, but now we're getting opportunities to shine, and I think he's absolutely going to shine. Did not even have him on my list before the season because he wasn't projected to wear the green dot. But if he's going to be the linebacker one there for the Rams, obviously we've seen last year Troy Reeder, what he's done, Ernest Jones, what he's done there, and, other Omar Spates even as the second linebacker popped last year. So Nate Landman, if he's the first linebacker, I think there's huge upside to be had. Maybe he could even end in the top 15, 16. That's a little bit of a pipe dream right now. Let's take it one day at a time. But Nate Landman, 2024, last season, wasn't a full-time player, 65% of snaps. 2023, 75% of snaps. And let's look at that 2023 year. More snaps were there. He had 110 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 sacks. And that was just on 75% of the snaps. So, let's call it 100. Maybe he's looking at 130 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 or 3 sacks. So that's a huge difference. I do expect him to be I think he's the best linebacker. Even though he's a new guy on the team, they have some other good linebackers. I still think Nate Landman, as soon as he arrived, I'm saying like this is a guy I want to pay attention to, and they should put him there because if he ever gets the opportunity to wear the green dot, be the number one linebacker, I think that he can average 8 or more tackles per game. So, big proponent of Nate Landman to round out this list. Him and Jack Sanborn are like my 2 biggest sleepers, and like them coming into the preseason too. So I'm glad they've got their opportunity and have done nothing but balled, absolutely balled. So that's rounding out my 24 list. I did mention I have some sleepers here. I actually call them honorable mentions, guys who I think are not far outside this list. So right outside of my top 24, I got guys like the first one was actually in my top 24, Bobby Okereke from New York. Now Bobby Okereke, great player. Actually did not miss a snap in 2023. Played 100% of snaps the whole year. career year just 2 years ago, 149 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Last year, it was even doing well. He played 12 games with 93 tackles and also 2 sacks as well. That was an average of 7.8 tackles. So he would have been fine had he stayed healthy, but that's the problem. So Bobby Okereke is great of a trajectory he was on. Last year, he did have back issues, and back issues, no matter what sport you're playing, what position, are a big problem. He said he had trouble sitting down, for the next week after before he had surgery. So he says he's good right now. I don't know if he really is, or if the team sees him that way because, you type on Bobby Okereke's name up on Google, you're going to see that, the Giants have kind of don't know what to do with Bobby Okereke. They might think he's expendable, might have other guys, Darius Musau, who can kind of take his spot. And on one part of me says, like, this is real. This news is real. And Musau and Micah McFadden are capable linebackers there. At the same time, Bobby Okereke and Darius Musau, who do you think is the better linebacker? And maybe, Bobby's not healthy, but I'm not going to get completely fooled by this. I am going to try to draft, Bobby Okereke probably in Yahoo Sleeper is ranked as a top 15 linebacker. So at that price, I'm out. But if I can get him outside the top 24, I'm absolutely going to take that shot. The risk reward is huge both ways. Obviously, he could, miss out on a starting job and you drop him by week 1. Or he, returns to form and the, Giants actually realize that he's their best linebacker and, the good times keep rolling. So Bobby Okereke, very polarizing player, but I could definitely see him pop back into the top 24. Has the potential to, still in the prime of his career. Another guy, Demario Davis, older guy now, mid-30s, but 120 sacks with at least 2 or more, 120 tackles with 2 or more sacks over the last 2 years. So Demario Davis, older guy, kind of a Bobby Wagner, Levante David type of player, still, projected the best linebacker in the best spot, middle of the pack, middle of the defense there for the Saints. So Demario Douglas, just consistency. Consistency is important. Like we said with Bob Lung's guide, consistency in IDP is huge too. So Demario Davis should not be drafted much later than this. Tyrese Knight, who I had mentioned, was a big reason why I had moved Ernest Jones down. Tyrese Knight over the last 8 games, again, what did that rookie do for me his last 8 games? Well, in those 8 games, Tyrese Knight had 65 tackles. 8 times 8 is 64, so he actually had a little bit more than 8 tackles per game down the stretch last year. So I'm very high on Tyrese Knight as an LB2, borderline LB3. And then finally, Christian Roseboom. Christian Roseboom, we would not be talking about his name most likely if Josie Jewell, did not have surprise concussion symptoms, recurring, I should say, concussion symptoms. But, Josie Jewell is not on the Panthers anymore. Panthers, we expect to still be a bad team, although, progressing. But Christian Roseboom, 8.4 tackles per game. 6 out of the 16 games last year he had for the Rams. And we all know Christian Roseboom. He was a household name in IDP last year. One of those not sexy guys, but just a banger. And there's nothing wrong with that in IDP. 8.4 tackles per game last season on a whole. And 6 out of the 16 games were double-digit tackle games. So Christian Roseboom, I do believe he's the Mike linebacker there. They might mix in Trevin Wallace too, but I think Trevin Wallace is the guy who comes off the field instead of Roseboom. So, Christian Roseboom, best case scenario, he's basically who he was for the Rams last year, and we can run it back again. But nonetheless, Demario Davis, Tyrese Knight, Christian Roseboom, and Bobby Okereke are my honorable mentions. If you have any questions, first off, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe here. Give me a follow on Twitter at Johnny Freakin' Fantasy. If you have any questions for me, I know your IDP drafts are coming up. That's why I wanted to get this information out to you. Please leave me a comment, whether your questions about somebody on this page in my top 24 or outside of it. And I'll make sure to get back to you and stick what we're doing here on IDP Plus and keep look out for, more videos from the team. And, I'll try to get back to the lab and look at defensive backs for my next episode before the season starts. So best of luck. Thanks for rocking with me on this episode, another episode of the IDP Plus podcast. And best of luck in your drafts in your 2025 IDP seasons. We'll be here all year, ladies and gentlemen. Like and subscribe.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.